Our speaker this afternoon, Linda Hanna, began sewing at the age of 12. And in addition to making some of her own clothing, she used to add decorative fabric to the bottom of her pants so they would be long enough because of her height. At that time, proportion pants were not available. She also crocheted purses, belts, and ties as gifts to family and friends. Eventually, Linda's love for sewing and crafting led to an interest in millinery. She took classes at Verti's Millinery in Detroit, taught her late husband, and then started a business, Uniquely Yours Millinery, and later, Forever Sweeney Millinery. Her love for presenting on the history of hats evolved from creating hats and her appreciation of the various styles worn in old classic movies. Linda has created custom millinery for more than 25 years, designing many one-of-a-kind pieces for avid hat wearers, providing hats to Michigan and out-of-state boutiques, and she taught the craft for several years at a local fabric store. Linda opened with Hat Moments for an inspirational instrumentalist at the Detroit Music Hall, presented for the Detroit Derby Brunch, and has lectured at the Detroit Historical Museum. Her hats have been featured in the Farmington Observer and Eccentric, Styleline Magazine, Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, and other publications. Please help me welcome Linda Hanna.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. Very excited and was looking to see if I would see some hats in the audience, so some of you did not let me down today. So anyway, I'd like to, first of all, everyone knows what a hat is. You know, it's a covering, it's going to have a top and sides, and they don't always have a brim. But the basic use of a hat started many centuries ago, actually thought in Egypt, where there was a depiction on a wall and of a woman with a hat on. But most of the time, hats were created for warmth, for protection, and actually use for any type of occupational use. And then later on, it evolved into fashion. So I have this little poem that I wrote that I like to share with people, and it's called About Time. Late 19th century, a restrictive time. Not talking fashion, but corsets that bind. Time of the hourglass silhouette. Big hats topped with feathers, birds, and net. Victorian, Edwardian was the fashion trend, with women's organs all squashed within. It's a bad sight. Early 20th century, in a dress called a sack, vertical silhouette, chemise, and all of that. This new looser fit took off like wow. Comfort and ease were the buzzwords now. Knitwear and jersey as designers led, making way for the fashions ahead. Next, 1940s timeline in fashion, fabric shortages, coupons, and rationing. Society changed from effects of the war. 5 buttons, 2 pleats, 2 pockets, no more. The good news, hats were not restricted. But purchasing one, you paid a high tax on it. Yes, 33%, so you had to want it bad. Yeah, hats lifted morale. They were more than just a fad. Hat history, hat moments, it's all about time, looking at some past, but not staying behind, for learning, discovering, and appreciating too, designs of the past and all things new. So now we'll get started. Okay, let me turn this on. That'll help. I just talked about corsets. So I named this little section on the inside. I want everyone to see, hopefully you can see from this angle, what happened to what's normal. So this was late 19th century, a little bit of early 20th century, and what happened to the organs here in order to look like this. So a lot of pain and discomfort involved to me. But this is what was happening then. I won't get into it, but there's a whole nother corset history, believe it or not. And just a brief little FYI, there were 2 doctors, they were brothers, and they were really against women having to, wear all these corsets that were really destroying their body. And they were on a campaign, and they created what was called a health corset. Of course, they put the word health there, and of course, they're doctors. And it wasn't as binding, and it took off. They became like millionaires, and this was way back in the day. But I just like to touch a little bit on the history of corsets, or show you a little bit, because before I get into another time, the uncorseted silhouette, which would be sort of like what I have on now, that tubular silhouette. This vertical look here, I'll talk about who designed these in just a moment, was free-flowing, and these were designed, this was circa 1908 here, by this designer, Paul Perot. He was actually before Coco Chanel, before that day, and his father was a clothing merchant, and he used to work for an umbrella maker. So he would take the scraps from the umbrellas, and he would make a little dowel clothes out of them and give them to his sister. So there was a designer who had a designing house who saw his work and hired him to begin to design clothes for his design house. His designs were more of a very loose-fitting and very kimono type style, Asian type style, and he was known very much for that. But, well, let me step back one moment to tell you one other thing about him. He had to go off to the war, World War I. So that was around 1914 to 1918, and when he got back in 1919, his design house had pretty much gone bankrupt because, of course, he was the main designer and he wasn't there to do the designs. He never recovered from that, unfortunately. He had done very well before then, but after this, he ended up living with a friend and later on passing away. Speaking of World War I, of course, there was a big campaign during that time for women to join the military to help with the war effort, and so there were campaigns all over the place and signage to come out and help. Women, for the first time, were going out to work in the workforce. And this right here, this munitions, this was dangerous work right here. Actually, there was like police officers, female constables were actually hired to inspect and kind of supervise the women because they had to make sure they didn't take anything in that would cause an explosion. There had been some dangerous times where there were explosions. So while there's a big talk about women being free and liberated and going out and working, which it did create a lot of that for women, there was very dangerous work, long hours in what they did. This is in 1915. This woman here, she became London's first female bus conductor. She was a clippy. And later on, it was actually about it wasn't until like 1974 that they actually started hiring bus drivers. It was a long time later, but back then when times were hard and they needed the help of the women, this is what they did. It was a lot of other transportation type jobs. There were bus drivers, ambulance drivers. They did clerical work as well, but a lot of them were working in transportation. So now, we all have heard the word flapper, roaring 20s, jazz age, that all seems to go together. And flappers, as you see this picture on the left, is typically how we think of them, short dresses, smoking. There's a lot of defiance going on right then, driving a lot of parents right up the wall because they were basically defying things. After the war, there was like this, or during that time, during the war and that time after, there was this whole sense of, I just want to kind of live and have some fun and be free, look what's going on. And so, they defied the rules, the drinking and smoking, the skirts were high, and they were doing pretty much what they wanted to do. These are some pictures here. I'm going to have to flip just a little bit. There was a little bit of technology that didn't work for me today, and I want to make sure that I don't miss telling you anything here. Just a moment, please. Thank you. So yes, they dominated the social scene. Actually, prior to this, most women had to be chaperoned when they went out. Their husband or man was with them. But during this flapper era and women out and about working, they're out catching buses, they're out getting to work on their own. There's a sense of freedom, and they went about and they went pretty wild with it. Here are some people that you'll see. Josephine Baker, she was a singer, civil rights activist, a dancer. She was an icon of the jazz age. Notice this hat here, and we'll be talking about more hats here. This is a type of cloche, very close fitted. There was a time the cloche you'll see as a bell shape and then more of like a helmet shape. And so what she has is like a helmet, and I'll show you some on the table. Here's someone I learned about recently. One of the things I love is about what I do is I'm constantly learning. There are things that I know from having making hats over the years and making some historical pieces for people. But in my reading and researching, I constantly learn new things. And so I learned about this young lady here who was a tennis player, a pro back in these days. And she was known as a flapper. Now, of course, she has her length dress here, but she was known for wearing very short dresses and smoking and all that too, because that was just what they were doing during that time. Now, here's Mary Louise Brooks. Her professional name, she was known as Louise Brooks. She was an American film actress, and she was also a noted flapper, known for this helmet look, also called like the Dutch boy type look, Buster Brown look. She was known, they would call her like the black helmet because it was so sharp and so close to her face. And as you see here, she's wearing a cloche hat. During the 1920s, and there was a time when women were cutting their hair when they were working out in factories. Of course, today, back then, there were no safety laws, no rules and regulations to protect women. And I don't even want to think about accidents that probably happened for some people to learn that they probably should cut their hair. But a lot of women cut their hair and they were feeling free, and so this is the kind of style you had. So what you see mostly with the cloche, you see more of the cloche than the hair actually. And I always call it the bob and the bell because you've got these bell hats and you've got the bob hairstyle going hand in hand. Women wore long hair, and cloche hats, yes, they were popular during the 20s, up until around 25 or so, but still they dominated the decade for maybe about 8 of those 10 years. But one of the people that made their mark with millinery was Coco Chanel. She actually didn't make a cloche hat. The kind of hat she made was more like a boater hat or a sailor hat, with the flat top sides and just like a 3-inch brim. They call it a sailor or a boater. Her work was impeccable though. She was starting to make and design hats around the time when Paul, the gentleman you saw earlier, was making hats. He had to go to war during that time, but she was just coming on the scene. And I did read that, his work was great. Her work was great too, but Coco Chanel had a thing about the quality of the inside of her clothing. Whereas Paul, from what I understand, his clothing was amazing on the outside, but not quite on the inside. And I remember when I took home economics many years ago, and I learned to sew. My mom taught me how to sew as well. She always told me, Linda, your seams should look just as good on the inside as they do on the outside. So you don't want to open this garment like, oh my goodness, what's going on? There's some mess in there, Or, you can at least take a pinking shear. One thing about it, if you didn't want to, oh yeah, good old pinking shears. And just take that thing, and then that keeps down on some of the cutting. So I have 2 pair of pinking shears, okay? I always keep those. Anyway, she really popularized the uncorseted, this nice, smooth, casual, chic look and feminine style. Let me tell you this, it's amazing how successful she became because of her upbringing. She was an orphan, and she worked in a place for girls, in a shelter, for about 6 years. And while she was there, she learned to sew. So she would sew during the day, and at night, to make extra money, she would go sing at a club. And that's how she got the nickname, because the song, I believe, is called Kiki E Coco, and that's how she would sing that song that said the word Coco in it. And so there were a lot of gentlemen there, and they started nicknaming her Coco. She had one admirer who liked her so much that he actually funded her first hat shop in 1910. She learned how to make hats, but she was a licensed, what they called a licensed modist, or we would call a milliner. But what I found out was that you had to be licensed to make clothing, and she wasn't licensed to make clothing, only hats. But she had a little way around that. What she did was she did something unconventional, and that was her style, and that's probably why she's so successful. Well, men's underwear was made out of jersey, and she didn't have a lot of money, so she used men's underwear to start creating designs. And it was so soft, right? And comfortable. and knit. So that's where she got it just took off. She started making clothing out of jersey. Here she is, I was talking about here how she initially had to get her money to make designs was to buy jersey because it was very inexpensive. So she revolutionized the fashion. You've got this nice silhouette, flattering. She looks very nice here. I love this whole outfit. is so, I mean, this is something you could wear today. The nice thing about Coco Chanel, her clothing line is really just timeless. And even though her Chanel suits, you know, the tweed suits, you know, of course we can tell the timing of things sometimes with shoulder pads. Other than that, they're just timeless. Here's her with her aunt here. Her aunt supported her and her sister, they would model, but this is Coco over here at the right. I want you to remember something that happened in 1923, because I'm going to come back to it later. She invited some journalists to her shop, and she showed them her first Chanel suit. Well, they didn't like it. In fact, they were underwhelmed by it, so to speak. They were like, they just didn't like it. So we know many people successful today, right? Where someone thought you won't be successful, you can't sing, you can't act or whatever, or you can't teach. And they can, because we can't just depend on what someone else tells us, right? If we depend on what someone else told us, some of us would never do anything. So she was unconventional. She didn't let that stop her. But that happened in 1923. As far as her cologne, she was working with a perfumer, and he designed or made 10 different samples. And he numbered the first set 1 through 5 and the second set 20 to 24. And so she said, well, I always design clothing on the 5th day and launch them on the 5th of the month, 5th month of the year, so I'll name it number 5. And so that's how she came out with that. She was also known for what's called the LBD, or the little black dress. It's such a classic. And there's some story behind it. A gentleman that she was dating back then that she wasn't married to, that he got killed in a car accident. And prior to that, it was said that she didn't really work with black fabric. And after he got killed, she started experimenting with black fabric because she was mourning. And so she started creating black designs. And so to this day, you know, every woman wants to have a little black dress in their wardrobe. It's such a classic of hers. Well, a lot of the styles were dictated by Paris as usual. And American designers, milliners, and clothing, they would go over there, bring them back, copy the designs, and sell them in some of your big stores right alongside the other ones that inspired them. So that was not, and it was okay to do, but as long as you said this is an adaptation of, or this is a copy of, or this is a creation of, and name that designer. So that was something that was common then, and people weren't ashamed of that at all. And one of the things I want to mention about cloche hats. Now, you see this one here, this black one with the red band, I made that one. There are a few hats up here that I've made. I can tell you that about those later, but this red and black one I made. So that's really that 1920s look, you know, it's nice and deep. You know, the hats came across here, and it was said the women had a very mysterious look. They wore dark eyeshadow, red lipsticks, and they had, you know, they had the hat down. So they had this flapper, really, you know, mysterious look about them. Well, you know, styles change all the time. So the cloche of the 1930s, not all, but a trend occurred where they rose a little bit further back on the head. You see how this is a little bit further? You still have this deep look, but now more of the face is shown, okay? And some other things going on in the 1930s, the hat trimming, like in the poem is saying, the hats were not rationed, but some of the trimmings did get really conservative. There was some rationing on some materials, some beads or some sequins. There was rationing on some trimmings, just like for the clothing designers. And as time went on and the war affected things, it affected being able to buy wool or to get silk. The war needed things for parachutes and other things during the war. And so this affected fashion, what was happening in the world, because then sometimes the lapels would go from being this wide to being that narrow, okay? And then the flaps you have on your welt pockets, no more flaps on the welt pockets, because we got to conserve, right? Got to conserve fabric. And so if you can't do that, that actually changed the designing of your clothing, which isn't a bad thing. It's just that you have to get more creative. So things that happened in the world really affected how we were able to design clothing, like there was limitation on buttons and such. The tilt hat, I love this style. This is in the 1930s, and yes, this is a really hard band, but it doesn't hurt. It's actually lightweight. These are felt here. Tilt hats were really popular in the 1930s. I mentioned in the poem that hats lifted morale, and you'll read that throughout history. I mean, when it comes with hats, they lifted the morale because of the depression that was going on. And so all kind of weird looking hats came out at that time. I'm talking like, you'll see a shoe hat. I mean, just weird looking stuff that clothing designers would make. It was like in colors. Oh my goodness, they wanted bright colors. And you know, if they couldn't buy clothing, if they were limited, they would buy a hat, you know, and if you saw a hat then, you may not see a ton of flowers and feathers on them, but you may just see one flower or one feather or a self bow, sort of like this hat here. That's a self bow, all that's within that hat. You'll see that commonly in the 30s and 40s if you pick up a book on that era. Here's some more tilts, and this is called a dowel hat, which you can probably tell because typically, well, this is on a mannequin, and sometimes they're this small. And you've probably seen them even on party hats at New Year's Eve or etc. And they're called dowel hats. Why? Because they're small, like they could go on a dowel. But they stay on the back of your head with this band. You'll see a lot of fascinators made with this too. A lot of fascinators in that. I have actually, and I collect vintage hats, and I found one like this. I didn't bring it today. I would bring in my whole truck if I brought all my hats, no. But anyway, I can't bring everything, but these are all tilts. And so that was the fad, and that was the style during that time. I always tell people the cloche never went away. The one thing I can say is the cloche is still here today. It's so many various styles. In fact, there's this style right here. Okay, it's longer on the one side, but there's so many different variations, and the cloche style will never go away. Another style hat that will never go away is a fedora, and pretty much everybody probably knows what a fedora is, a really sharp hat. This is a picture of my cousin Seal that I found, and this was in November 1938, and I put her in the tilt category because of the hat, you know, tilted off to the side. Elsa Schiaparelli. She's the one, you're going to see a very unique hat she made. Look at this one that she has on here. I mean, really angled. I'm telling you, during that time in the late 30s and early 40s, a lot of angled hat. But here now you've got this helmet like cloche design too. One of the things that kind of hurt her during her, she was actually pretty much a rival of Coco Chanel because she was designing at the same time fabulous hats as well. And clothing, but what hurt her is she didn't adapt to, she was making hats a lot between the wars too, but she didn't adapt to some of the changes, you know, with hat designs, and so she didn't keep up, and then her business pretty much folded. So that's just like these days, you have to constantly be changing. There's her shoe hat. See, you automatically knew what it was. I didn't have to say. Kind of weird, but it's very popular, and this was in the 30s, so can you imagine putting that on and walking out the house? Okay, so it's gonna be a lot of laughing going on, okay? So I said it lifted morale, right? So it's making people laugh. So people did really silly things, and you know, if I'm not, she made clothing for Mae West also. And I don't think she made this hat for her, but she was making clothing for her around that time, and it mentions this. So in another, there's a lot of other pictures out there. If you Google shoe hat, you'll see some others. And I think it was with a really beautiful black jacket with some red design on it. So a moments of distraction, because now, of course, because of the Great Depression, people needed something to kind of distract them. People watched a lot of Hollywood movies, kind of put themselves into movies. People went dancing a lot. And so that's what it's called. You know, a lot of swing dancing was going on during that time. That looks like a lot of fun. And people would kind of detach themselves from what was going on in the world and get out and dance and everything. And big bands were very popular around that time too. But unfortunately, with the big bands, they had like a strike that went on, and they ended up folding because some belonged to the union, some didn't belong to the union, and there was a lot of rift within that, and some band leaders quit, and you know what happens when the bands break up and then, you know, they're not successful. So actually that big band era, and I love hearing that music still though, but it really faded out. And then from there, you got, you know, young people got into bebop type music. So I know all of you probably have seen this picture before. Yeah, so Rosie the Riveter. Every year there's this contest, and all these women come dressed up like this. You probably see it on the news. It's actually, I can't remember what time of year it is, but every year there's a contest because all over the United States, each state is trying to have the most Rosies. So they all get these bandanas and the overalls, and they go out here to Ypsilanti, and they show up, they take pictures, and they do a real count. And I believe Michigan has won a couple of times. They may have gotten beat last year, but this is very popular. And as you see, it's associated with a real woman. And in Ypsilanti, she was making B-24 bombers for the U.S. Army and Air Forces. Rosie the Riveter. And there's a song after that, her Rosie the Riveter song and all of that. See these headbands? Again, now, do the job he left behind is similar to the poster we saw in the 20s where they were saying go out and help out, because that's what the women need to do. When the war happened, all these men had to go to war, and it left all these jobs that need to be done. So women were welding, they were doing all type of work that men had trained for a while to do, that they had to get right in there and learn quickly and do. And women also gained a lot of economic independence as well. Women started earning their own money, and so they began working more. And a couple of things I was really impressed by is that women during that time, they were so coordinated. They would actually move in together and then take care of each other's children, because in order to help each other work. And one other thing I liked that I thought was so precious is that during this time of shortage and fabric shortage, there was one wedding dress that was worn 12 times. Isn't that precious? Yeah, so, you know, they just, next, I mean, you only needed it once, right? So just pass it on. So this is showing just all different races and cultures working side by side for a common goal to assist with the war efforts. Oh, and I'm going to tell you here, because I want to make sure you know, there were over 6 million women who got war jobs, but there were 19 million women who held jobs altogether during the war. That's a lot of women, 19 million, okay? And 6 million in just war jobs alone. Wow. Again, a lot of dangerous work. See that hair all pulled back? Yeah, protect it. Mm-hmm. And there was at one point, there was I don't know if it was Maybelline, I have to double check. There was a makeup company who would encourage the women, like they worked long hours and they were in these dirty clothes and jumpsuits and things all during the day. And so they would take breaks, and this company would come in and like bring them makeup and like, so they could feel good and have to dress up. In fact, around this time, women were like dirty and greasy all during the day. When they got off from work, they wanted to feel like free of that. You know, they wanted something light on and airy and colorful and pretty and light. And so some of the hats during that time ended up, a lot of them with scarves on them, stuff, like this red one here with the scarves that hung down. You'd see just a little tiny hat. And one hat I've seen, the hat is probably like only this large, and the scarf is going all the way to the floor. Pretty dramatic, So talking about fashion on the ration, these posters were real deals, okay? Make do and mend. The idea was to make do with what you had and mend it. So women were making, like I said, I mentioned that wedding dress was used 12 times. That was that whole mindset as well. And also some women made clothing out of Chanel bedspreads, or they'd take their husband's wool coat and they'd make a skirt out of it. And so there was utility clothing around that time where you had to, you may get one suit, one skirt, 2 blouses. The man may get one suit, one overcoat. And that clothing was made very durable. And that's what the manufacturers were kicking out. And it was meant to last a long time, because you couldn't just be out buying a lot of clothing, because you either had to have coupons to buy clothing. You had to have so many coupons to buy certain things. And from what I read, that women actually would wait in long lines just to buy black lingerie. I mean, it was certain things that were still precious to them that they wanted. And so then they had to wear shoes that with wooden heels, which were loud and clanky. But I guess, if they can get the other thing, that's what they would wear. So that's what they had to do, was make do and mend. So this was the iconic look of the wartime. So in the United States, it was called the victory suit, and Britain was called the utility suit. But as you can see, the 2 buttons, no pleats. See, a little fullness here, but no petticoats, none of that going on during that time. So making do makes way to elegance. As I was saying, that these are some of the type of hats, very pretty This hat here, you see this other with the felt, the tricorn with the chiffon hanging down. There was this feeling of wanting to have this delicate, soft feel on their clothing. Lily Dash, I love her hats. I love the flowers. She was into the whole romance with the flowers. She made amazing hats. And let me see, there was one other hat. Well, I'll show you these. She didn't make these, but these are beautiful. And I just wanted to show you, to me, if she made them today, this is basically what they would look like. These were made. I went to a Detroit Derby brunch last year, and women come in hats that are as wide as a door. I mean, they're trying to win the contest, okay? Has this tall, it's fun watching. I just enjoy watching. But the woman who won actually had on a hat just almost like that. It was gorgeous. And it was mostly pink and white and some lavender flowers. And then she had on just like a lavender blouse, but a full-length skirt that was cream with lavender and pink flowers all on it. It was stunning. So, I mean, it was no wonder that she won. And afterward, I found out, my husband Keith is here with me today, I found out that she was the one who made our flowers for our wedding. I was like, oh, that's the lady who made Yeah, the same woman. She had made her headpiece. She's an engineer by profession, but she makes flowers for weddings. Well, she made her own, and she won. It's absolutely beautiful. These are real flowers, real fresh flowers. As you can see that basket back up in here to connect those two. They're absolutely gorgeous. You know, hat creations, they're endless, just like clothing. I mean, if you have 5 people in a room and 5 are designers, milliners, you're going to get all kind of designs. And that's one thing I love about it as well. Here was in the 1930s and 40s. You see like this navy blue hat here. You know, this is like a self bow on the hat. You can see here and here. Not a lot to the hat. Just simple, but very good hat. It's a felt hat. Carmen Miranda, she was known for her fruit hats. If we're going to talk about flowers, I guess we can talk about fruit. So, it's known for her fruit hats. And she got her inspiration from Brazil, from the ladies who sold fruit there. And that's where she got her inspiration from. So here comes this new look with Christian Dior. And there were some women who didn't like the idea of this new look coming because they thought, I'm not going back into this cinched waist look, you know, all that tightness, maybe not corsets, but there were some women who were kind of like protesting, saying, we don't like this style. But there were a lot of women after this whole utility clothing with no pleats and nothing going on, just straight up clothing with suits, they were ready for some dresses. So during this time, late 40s, mid 50s, you were either in 2 categories in your clothing. It was flowing or fitted. So here's this look, you've probably seen it before. It's the departure for the women who had been rationing during the war. It's a radical departure. I mean, they were happy to this is probably 6 yards right here, okay? I mean, that's gathered. That's a lot of excessiveness that wouldn't dare happen back during the time when there was restrictions, because there were literally laws that prevented you from having clothing that had, I mean, there's no way you could walk around with a pleated skirt. You would stand out. There's no way, even if you made it yourself. And I will say a lot of women got really creative, and they were making their own clothing at the best they could, but by and large, you were buying utility clothing and you were giving clothing. This is what you saw a lot. What you saw is this type hat. You see this wide hat during the late 40s and 50s. A lot of times it would go from here to there, and then you see this part here. You know, you'd see the cinched waist, almost like what I was just showing you. It's the pencil skirt. So I said flowing and fitted, right? The pencil skirt, where women kind of had to walk almost like this because it's so. Okay, either that or you're gonna have a really nice long slit, because you're not gonna be walking too well. And don't even talk about getting in a car. That's not even a sports car, forget that. Okay, so yeah, that would be pretty difficult. I have to talk about Mildred Blount. I was amazed when I learned about her. She was the first African-American milliner to design hats in movies. And she was the first to become a member of the Motion Picture Costumers Union, which she had to be to make Hollywood clothing for Hollywood films. Well, she made hats for Gone with the Wind. and very well known. She went to a lot of high society type events. Here she is with Gloria Vanderbilt. Okay, here she is right here at Gloria Vanderbilt's wedding. Okay, she designed this whole large headpiece, and all this tulle was designed by Mildred Blount. And here are some other of her hats. Here she is in her hat shop making and designing hats. You know, we don't see women wear hats like we used to, not in the United States, not quite. Some churches, maybe some Baptist churches or certain denominations, you still see hats, but not a lot anymore. I mean, over in, you know, in Britain, those places where it's still very common to wear hats, as time went on, we kind of got a little bit more casual in our attire. And as we got more casual, then women stopped wearing hats like they used to. So talking about 1950s classic, another person I love talking about is Jackie Onassis Kennedy and her pillbox hats. I mean, it's not almost, look, it's not almost any picture, everything you see, you always see her in a pillbox hat. And she wore them on the back of her head. That's not the way I would wear mine, but that's the way she wore hers all the time. Let's put this picture here of one of my models here with her showing this pillbox look again. And this is a vintage piece I found. It's a pillbox. I didn't bring it with me, but this is a vintage that has a pretty bow on the front, similar type look. It says the mark of a well-dressed woman was her hat. And there are all kind of little slogans and sayings about hats. Now, a comeback. Remember I mentioned 1923, we wanted to remember that Coco Chanel invited these journalists in. She wanted them to see her Chanel suit. They didn't like it. Well, times changed, and she designed that hat, went to someone else, and it took off. And so it was 31 years later that this happened, and she was like 71 years old at this point. I love that because I'm like, she never gave up. And that's like an iconic suit. Now, of course, this one right here, this is a dated, you can tell that's kind of dated here, but it's so classic. Another thing about Chanel, she loved and she promoted faux jewelry. She loved beads and glass beads, and on her suits, if you recall, if you've seen them in a magazine, she would have them on her pockets. She would have beads on her pockets. Sometimes she'd have chains on the pockets and chains even along the hem of the skirt. She was big into that. Her philosophy was that she would rather see a woman have a lot of fake jewelry and have fun with it and wear it during the day than to have just one or two pieces of very expensive jewelry. She thought it was more fun to have a lot of jewelry. So because of her, women felt comfortable, and you would see them, well, you see what's on her right here. That's her working right there and fitting her. She's typically, in most pictures, she's not wearing one strand. Typically, she's having like 4 or 5 strands of pearls on. And so I'm going light today, just with 2, pretty light today. She believed in that a lot. So here's more in the up-to-date, but see this classic look? You know, and being a seamstress, you know, some of the only things that would change with the skirt would be just the length or maybe the band. You know, some skirts had bands and years later it kind of got away from the band. But this is her there, and yes, she has a cigarette in her mouth, so. The 60s, the age of fashion innovation. You know what, you're subject to see a hat that looked like a hooded hairdryer, you know, the big hooded hairdryer. Oh yeah, there were hats that looked like that. They were, okay, so let me tell you what happened here. Got a couple of them here. But what happened is milliners started losing market share because what happened is women started wearing wigs like, wow. I mean, they were wearing wigs, and I don't have my statistics. I want to tell you the exact number. There was so much hairspray sold, it was crazy. Now, I'm looking for that number. I'll find it and tell you. But there was like tons, so it was like a record number of cans of hairspray that was sold during that time because women were wearing their hair all up in these bouffant hairstyles and lacquering them up, you know. Now, you know they weren't going to put a hat on it because their hair was, you know, what was going on, and they wanted to show their hairstyle off and everything. So milliners were like, oh, shoot, I'm not making any money now. What am I going to do? So they started making hats that look like wigs. And they started making really silly hats, and that's pretty much what they did because, as you can see, the hairspray, there it is. I have it up here. It leaked 280% between 54 and 57. Is that a percentage or what? Okay, and hat sales slumped 31%. That's huge. So during this time, the 50s and the 60s, as I said, things began getting more casual. As women stopped, they weren't wearing gloves to the market and a hat and coat in their pocketbook looked like they were going to church, and then they'd go to the market looking really cute. You didn't see that anymore. People started losing all that pomp and circumstance, so to speak, of going out, and they would go out very casually dressed. And jeans became very popular in the 70s, 60s, and so basically the type of hats you see now are caps. You still see, you'll see a Breton, you'll see a derby, you'll see a cloche, but most women go hatless these days and wear hats for special occasions. So, when the royal weddings took place, I was like glued to the TV like this, right? Oh my goodness, I loved it. And at that time, my boss was a female. I loved it because she was like, Linda, come in here. So we're in her office, like looking at the whole wedding. And it was amazing because the hats are endless. Philip Tracy, who makes a lot of the Queen's hats and a lot of the others, the hats are just absolutely amazing. And the fascinators, it's like a contest of who wants to make the most unique fascinators. I think it was Fergie back in the first wedding that wore that really weird looking thing, and everyone was talking about it. So I thought, well, if you want to be talked about, just wear something really unique and your name will be in the papers. But just wanted to share a couple of hat facts with you, is that where the term fedora came from. So as you can see, it was originated in 1887 from an actress who played Fedora Romanoff. Okay. And so that's where that term came from. The fedora hat was so nice. It's a really unisex hat. Man or woman, little boy or girl can wear a fedora. And the fedoras never have much on them other than the band. And so they come in a good felt. Of course, there's different qualities of it. You've got really good felt hat ones. You've got, really inexpensive, little cheap ones for 4th of July type hats that people can get from Walmart. And with the lights on it, because I have one. That's why I said that. And so there's a lot of different variations of the size of the brim, but not too much. And then I could be here a long time talking about hats, but I will say a couple other things, just like this gangster hat. And some people probably think, well, that may be a fedora, but it's not. You've probably seen this hat maybe on men that has this like round crown. It's like the crevice is round in the top. It has this little stingy brim. It's more like a gangster hat. And I mean, there are so many different hats, so I could get into men's hats or another story, but it's all very interesting. I love talking about hats and I love sharing facts. And I'm not sure if you know about the mercury vapors, this occupational hazard that happened. Now, so I'm pretty sure everyone in here has heard the term Mad Hatter or Mad as a Hatter, right? Yep. Okay, well, it actually came from a millinery occupational hazard. That's where that term came from. And I'm glad I was not making hats back then, because back in the day, this mercury that they used and boiled it in order to separate the skin from maybe like a rabbit or something to make this felt, sorry, but that's what was going on. Well, these vapors were poisonous, but the people didn't know it, of course. But you know what happened? People started acting weird. I mean, the hat makers, not everybody. Okay, so they started acting a little strange. Some started having neurological problems and acting a little strange. And so some doctors looked into it and they finally found out that it was the poison from the mercury. So unfortunately, you've got this substance that you're using to do some work with and it's harming you. And so it caused problems. And now, eventually got banned in 1941, but that was a long time to be happening, even around 1919, 1920. And so, because they were making felt hats, this is what felt hats, not straw, but felt. And so it affected a whole lot of people. But that's where that term Mad as a Hatter came from, or Mad Hatter. And I know there's a character in Alice in Wonderland, they say he acts a little kind of like that, so. But anyway, I hope you all have enjoyed the hat moments today, and thank you very much for your time.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where did the name Fascinator come from?
Fascinator, it's a term that means more like a whimsical hat, and I'm not sure who originated the term, but it's like fascinating, whimsical hat. And I believe it's more of a term that would have been begun more of in England than even in the United States. But, and thank you for that's a good question. I like being asked questions because it makes me even look deeper. Yes?
You mentioned various styles of hats, but you've not said anything about a woman's face in terms of long, wide, round, in relation to the type of hat she should wear.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have this one little thing called the 8 Commandments of Hat Wearing, and I'll read that in a little bit. I've been making hats for a long time, and I've run into so many women who say, I can't wear a hat, I can't wear a hat. And I've given teas and with friends and hat events at private events. And a lot of times when women are at like their own little private house or their party, they're more prone to try something on. And I'll say, no, you've got to try it on. And they'll try a hat on they thought wouldn't look good on them. And then when their girlfriends are like, oh my God, it looks great, it looks awesome, then they realize, they like it. Now, typically, people that have a very, very round face probably wouldn't wear a helmet type cloche like this little green one. Could you hand me that green, that hat right there? I'm going to be able to hold that up. Thank you. This is a helmet type cloche. This is a hat I made. I made it out of a drapery fabric. I made a suit to match it as well. And so it's kind of hard. So this is one of the hats I don't mind bringing out and letting people handle. It's fine. But if you had a very round face, to me, you wouldn't want to wear a helmet because it's just rounding out. Most people can wear a hat, but it's a matter of the type of hat that they're going to wear. A woman who's 4'10" is not going to want to wear a brim this wide, okay? Because it's like having an umbrella, on her or something like that. And so a woman that's 6'6", she's probably not going to wear a very high crown hat. But something like this hat here, this is another hat I made. This is a hat that's sculpted out of a felt, okay? And I couldn't redesign this one exactly like this if I wanted to because it's all sculpted by hand. It's steamed, it's stretched, it's bent, and it's pinned, and it's tucked, and it's sewn. And so something like this can sit pretty much on anyone's head, no matter the shape. And you don't have to worry about it being fitted because the standard hat size for ready to wear is 22.5. So if you go to any store and they're ready to wear a hat, it's going to be 22.5 inches. So I get women say, oh, I got a big head, okay. Or they go, oh, I have a small head, and I hear it all. And so, of course, me trying to make them feel better, I said, oh, no, your head's not big, So I just need to make a custom hat for you. Or I'll say you're really smart or something like that. So, but even I'm not a 22.5, I'm more like a 23. And to measure your head, typically what you would do is you would take the tape measure around right above the top of your ear and take it and just bring it right here and then just give maybe a little pinky under there just to give yourself a little give. And that'll pretty much give you your hat size. But this type hat anyone could wear and it wouldn't come off. Other hats you may have a problem with, like with this bucket hat or a helmet hat. These are stretchy type hats with the petals. Almost anyone can wear that. But it's really about how you feel it looks on you. You've got to feel good about it. A lot of women, and you'll read, it's about confidence and being able to carry it off. Really, I've seen women who are 4'11" wearing a hat this wide. But they have the hatitude, see. And when you have a hatitude, they can carry that thing off, okay? So it really it has a lot to do with your presence and how you feel about it, but it's about what you feel that looks good on you. Just certain clothing or certain cut jackets. Some people may not wear a Chanel jacket that cuts here at the waist where they'd rather have a long jacket. So kind of what you feel looks good on you is what I would say, but you definitely want to have a comfortable fit. You do not want to feel like you have a hat on. Like my glasses, I don't feel them on me. And this headband, I don't feel them on me. But if you have a hat on that's too tight, all you can think about is, oh my gosh, you're just doing this and you're trying to make it loose. No, just take it off and give it to somebody else. But I will say you can get hats stretched. It's hard to find a millinery shop these days. I still have an old-fashioned hat stretcher that I found I was in a fashion show years ago and we had to take these dresses back and it was a bridal scene. And I took it back to this bridal shop, I forgot it was out in Roseville. And I was just getting into making hats and I recognized what it was. It was this hat stretcher. It's big, it's heavy, it cranks out and it plugs in like an iron and you can put a hat on it and crank it out. And I thought, man, do I want one of those? But they were very expensive. I mean, they were probably like $400. So I looked at it, I said, oh ma'am, I said, wow, I said, are you all using that? Because it was like on the floor. She was like, no, we don't even use that anymore. I was like, I just started making hats. Can I buy that? She let me buy it for $75. That was the best return trip of taking something. It was great. I was so excited. So I still have it to this day, and I can stretch a hat. Yeah,
I wanted
I'm
to
sorry.
ask about hat pins.
Ah, I'm glad. Okay. Okay.
Just for show, or do they have real purpose?
She asked about hat pins. Are they just for show or for a real purpose? Good question, because you know what? I can't cover everything, and I love, and that's part of my notes that I couldn't get to, but I wanted to touch on hat pins. Hat pins back in the Edwardian, Victorian day were very popular because of this big white hat and all this fluff going on. And the hat pins, believe it or not, they were like 8 to 10 inches long. I mean, those were serious. They were serious hat pins because they had to go over that hair that's teased up, lock on, and pretty much hold the hat on. That was its function. A hat pin was really for the function, but it was pretty as well. Now, as time went on, and like the hats, you know, that time went away, and then you had smaller hats and got into the cloche, you didn't see hat pin. Well, you saw them. You might see someone put on a boater hat or maybe a profile hat for decoration only. It was no need for a hat pin anymore because the hats came down on the head, and you really didn't need it for function. You could wear it, and actually I started getting into making them for a little while. Believe it or not, they were this little, I mean, like 4 inches. That wasn't gonna do anything but just decoration. You had a question, Linda?
Yes, the felt hat, do you begin with a square piece of?
Oh, you know what, I wanted to show you something. Let me see if, Keith, could you come here for a minute? I wanted to ask you if you could go in this hat box. This is my husband, Keith. Could you go in this box for me? If you can go in this box for me, I want to show you something. That's a good question. It's either in that box or if it's not in this one, it's in the, I hope it's in here. It's not in there. Can you go in the other one too, honey? Sorry, sweetheart. I want to show you something. I'm going to show you a cape line. I brought one with me to show you, and it's in this box over here. It's a red felt, they call it cape line. It's unblocked. And it's unfinished. It's called a cape line because it's not made yet. I'm sorry, honey, to put you on the spot right here, just like that. He's so helpful to me. Okay, great. Let me grab that out of there, then I'll put that back. Thank you, sweetheart. Okay, this is a cape line. It's a velour felt. I only work with velour felt. You see that beautiful nap on there? It looks like velvet. I don't work with regular felt. There's a big difference, okay? And so this has a nice body to it. It starts off like this. Then it starts off just like this. And then it gets put on a steamer. You know, I have one of those big steamers, and I just put it on there, and I just turn it on, and I put a bag over it. I was trained by a lady in Chicago to do that. And it gets really limp, like so soft, just like really hot too, and really limp. And then it becomes very stretchable. Now I can pull it, and I can bend it, and then I can do this. And then now this is not wet, of course, but if this was wet, I could take this and start bending it here, and I could start doing things like this, see? And now I'm gonna start getting a different shape out of it. Now I can choose to just put a pin there, and then I can stitch it later. I could even put a feather or a flower there. And it's endless. Now the back of the hat could stay long, or I could, but if it's soft, I'm gonna wanna do something with it, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna keep manipulating it until it ends up like this. And then another thing people do, I may decide, let's just say I cut the end of this off, like 1 inch off, and then I manipulate it, then I take that 1 inch off all that little flippy felt, and just have fun with it. Just put it on there, stick it on there, and let it stick out a different way. It's so endless what you can do with the fat hat. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It takes a long time for it to dry. It's a lot of work because I do it all by hand. The inside of the hat is hand sewn with the grosgrain inside. It's a lot of work, millinery work, and it's not uncommon for hats like this to run $275 or more. In fact, I know some that would sell it for $375 or $400, just depends. It depends on the amount of labor that went into it, the amount of time. I put a peacock feather. I love that peacock feather. I just stuck that on there because it just brings that color out really pretty. I did get a request for this hat, and I made a hat for this woman, a black one, but I did tell her up front, I said it's not going to be identical. You know, it's going to be pretty close. So I made it as close as I could as possible. So, yeah. Any more questions? Yes? Mm-hmm.
Well, I grew up when everybody got a new Easter hat. And I remember hearing on radio back then a song about wearing your Easter bonnet and walking down Fifth Avenue. Did that really happen, or was that
That's a good question. She asked if people really put on an Easter bonnet and walk down Fifth Avenue. Oh, see, someone said, yes, it really happened. Well, you know what? I bet that's where, you know what, at these derby events I go to, they have what's called a hat walk, and I've commentated their hat walks where it's like 25 women that come and they get randomly picked as they come into this event, this luncheon, and they come down and they have this contest walking with their hats. They probably stole that idea from the Easter parade. Yes. Yes, there is. Yes, and now that you mentioned the Easter parade, you remember Mildred Blount that I mentioned earlier made hats for Gone with the Wind? She made some with that for that movie as well.
When did like headbands start coming in?
Head,
You're not wearing the hat, you've got the headband on.
well, this particular style is sort of I would say probably in the last 20 or 30 years. It's just an offshoot of a fascinator. So, well, you know what, let me take that back. This is more of a modern style of it. Back in the day, they still made these, but they were a lot more, let's just say, this isn't that expensive. They were a lot more, what's the word I'm using? Thank you, that's what I'm looking for, and probably a lot more expensive as well. You know, the beading, I mean, I've got pictures of models or from the Great Gatsby movie, for example. Oh my gosh, the headband she had on, it's amazing, and I know it was a lot more than this, okay? So what they had was, I would say the style has probably always been around, an offshoot of it, and then it just gets so varied. This is just more of an elastic band. Yes, you had a question?
Oh, yeah, I had a comment very similar to what this lady said.
Yes.
When I enjoyed your show so much, but it made me think how important it was to go with my mom at Easter and to pick out my hat.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I remember when the Catholic Church said that women do not have to wear hats anymore.
Uh-oh. Threw him off.
I was just going to say, I didn't have to contend with hat hair anymore, and I was very happy about that.
Oh. So I'd have been losing market share because of people like Jeez, yes, ma'am. Yes. Oh, yes. Aretha Franklin had on an amazing hat at the inauguration for President Obama. And she had this gray hat on that was made by Luke Song. It was gray with rhinestones on it. She actually walked into his shop and basically picked it out. She just said, well, I want that color and I want a bow. And his mother worked there at that time too. It was in Detroit on Woodward near the old GM building in that area. And so that's where she would have gone and had that hat made. That hat took off like crazy. Okay, so it was showing helicopter commercials with the bow flying off. And I mean, everyone was talking about that Aretha Franklin hat. And Luke Song, his business shot up as far as everyone wanted that hat. There were other adaptations of that hat made. And but I do remember him, this was in the paper, I think, they said he was suing someone because they copied his bow or something. We're like, you can't copy a bow. I mean, bows have been around forever, so you can't say I can't make a bow on the hat because hats, there were bows on hats before he was born, you know, so. But yes, she was just quite amazing. She made that hat famous. She made that style famous. And I'm telling you, there's probably, I can't imagine the amount of women who have one of those in their closet. I mean, and in fact, I spoke at an event called Bringing the Big Hats back. And they had a cake made out of that hat. It was beautiful. It was this big. It was gray with the big bow and the little rhinestones. So it tells you how popular that Aretha Franklin. Thanks for asking about Aretha. Thank you. Any other? Yes.
Just a question. How did the hat styles affect the different areas of the United States, like the South, the North, the West, and the East? Was there a difference?
I'm not 100% sure how each area was affected, but I will say the hats, basically, they don't stop and start at a particular time. And so I would say maybe because of the culture, maybe of the Southern, if they're more into some of the big hats for church and such, that may make them more predominantly have big white hats. Big white hats were worn a lot at teas, profile hats. And remember, women were wearing 2 and 3 hats a day. I mean, they wear a hat during the morning, then there was a hat for a sporting event, there was a hat to go out, you know, to a garden party, there was a hat for the evening. And so sometimes a woman wore 4 hats in one day. Mm-hmm. Yes?
I'm just curious, were hats ever made for little girls? I mean, we've seen
adults, but what did they have for the kids?
Little girls wore basic little bonnets, nothing fancy back then. Just your basic straight little bonnets that they wore. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
I'm actually a hat model, so you and I need to talk about
I love your hat.
And my girlfriend is, she has another show somewhere else today, so they went that way, I went this way. But, so she has a lot of Victorian and Edwardian hats, which I mean, it's very rare to see those.
Yeah.
But I've learned some really cool, fascinating things about them.
Awesome.
The Edwardian hats, okay, so Victorian hats, so you have, you know, like think of President Lincoln time period, okay? So 1940s to 1955, the big, huge hoop skirts that look like Gone with the Wind.
Yep.
and all
Pluto
that.
and, mm-hmm.
They had little tiny hats that looked kind of like a bonnet, so you progressed from bonnet to this little tiny thing that sat on the back of your head, okay? Then you move into Valley Pack's Edwardian period, which is the really, really well
Yep. Elaborate.
yeah, beautiful things with
Yes.
elaborate hats, and the really well-to-do would pay for major money to have birds from Papua New Guinea made into hats, or you know, egrets.
Speaking of birds, the Audubon Society ruled out continuing to use birds on hats because there was a period where there were real live birds on hats during that time. Yeah, I know that's gross, but there were real hats. Real birds on hats. I definitely wouldn't want one like that. But they were banned, and it's a good thing they were, because I mean you can make good fake-looking birds, right? And put them on the hat. And plus that whole big ornate birds and nests. I mean, even in that time they had nests and little bird eggshells. I mean, they put the whole theme in the hat. So yes. So, but anyway, I'm gonna have to get ready to end now. But I can talk with you all a little bit afterward, though. Definitely.